It's a decision that changed the world forever. To end the deadliest war in history, the United States unleashed a weapon of almost unimaginable power on two Japanese cities. But the question that has haunted us ever since is simply, why? Let's dig into the events and the thinking that led to that moment. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll witness the terrifying moment the bomb fell. Then we'll trace the path to war and understand the brutal stalemate the world was in by 1945. After that, we'll see how this terrible new weapon came to be, how the war finally ended, and then we'll confront that huge lingering question. Was it justified? Before we can even begin to tackle the why, we have to understand the what. So let's go back. It's the morning of August 6th, 1945, in a city called Hiroshima. Picture this. It's a beautiful, clear morning. People are walking to work, kids are settling into their classrooms. It's a completely normal Monday in a business city. A single American B-29 bomber appears in the sky. But hey, that happens sometimes. No one was too alarmed. Then, at 8:15 in the morning, something drops from that plane. For 43 seconds, it just falls. This device, nicknamed Little Boy. On the ground, nobody could have possibly known what was coming their way. And then, in less than a second, the world ended. A fireball, literally hotter than the surface of the sun, vaporized the city center. People were erased, leaving only their shadows burned onto walls and stone. A superheated hurricane of a shockwave leveled everything for miles. And then came this dark, horrifying black rain, full of toxic dust. In a flash, 80,000 human beings were just gone. An event this catastrophic doesn't just happen in a vacuum. So how did the world get here? How did the United States and Japan, specifically, arrive at this horrifying moment? Let's rewind. Okay, so you've got World War II, right? It's basically a global showdown between two massive teams. On one side, you have the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Italy, and Imperial Japan. And on the other, the Allied powers, which included Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and eventually, the United States. For years, America tried really hard to stay out of it. They wanted to remain neutral. But things escalated, and they escalated fast. Imperial Japan was on a mission, building a massive empire across Asia. To try and stop them, the US decided to hit them where it hurt. They imposed an oil embargo. And this was a huge deal. It cut off 80% of Japan's oil supply. So Japan had a choice, back down or go all in. They chose to go all in. They launched that infamous surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, and just like that, America was in the war. All right, let's fast forward to 1945. By now, the war in Europe is over. Hitler's gone, Germany has surrendered. But the war in the Pacific? That's a whole different, much bloodier story. Japan was fighting with this terrifying intensity and showed absolutely zero signs of giving up. To get why they fought so hard, you have to understand the mindset. The Japanese military had taken the traditional samurai code, Bushido, and kind of twisted it into this super intense, fanatical ideology. The greatest honor you could possibly have was to die for the emperor, who they saw as a living god. Surrender was the absolute worst form of shame. And this led to tactics like the kamikaze, pilots literally flying their planes into ships on purpose. And if you want to see what that looked like in practice, just look at the Battle of Okinawa. It was the last big battle before a potential invasion of Japan, and it was an absolute bloodbath. American leaders looked at these numbers, 12,000 of their own dead, over 200,000 Japanese soldiers and civilians killed, and they did some grim math. A full-scale invasion of Japan, which they called Operation Downfall, would be a nightmare beyond comprehension. So, facing this absolutely catastrophic possibility, American leaders were suddenly presented with a secret. A horrifying alternative, a brand new kind of weapon, one with the power to maybe end the entire war in a single flash. And the timeline here is just critical. In April, President Roosevelt dies. Suddenly, Harry Truman is president, and he knew nothing about this top-secret atomic bomb project. Just 3 months later, it works. The first test is a success. The Allies issue one last warning to Japan: surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. Japan says no. The path was set. What happened next were the final, devastating moments of World War II. The blows that finally brought the deadliest conflict in human history to an end. You'd think Hiroshima would have been enough. But Japan's military leaders still refused to surrender. But then came a second massive shock. On August 9th, the Soviet Union declared war and invaded Japanese territory in China. Then, just hours later, a third shock. The US dropped another bomb, Fat Man, on the city of Nagasaki. It was that combination, that 1-2-3 punch, that finally convinced Emperor Hirohito to do what was once unthinkable: surrender. The total death toll from those two bombs is estimated to be around 200,000 people. And here's the statistic that is so hard to wrap your head around: 95% of them were civilians. Not soldiers, just regular men, women, and children. And that right there brings us to the debate that has been raging for decades, a question with no easy answers. Was this horrific act a necessary evil? President Truman himself never seemed to lose any sleep over it. His perspective was clear, and he never backed down from it. To him, it was simple. He was given a weapon that could end the war, and that's exactly what he used it for. So the official U.S. justification really comes down to these main points. The number one argument is that it saved lives, that a ground invasion would have cost maybe 1 million American soldiers their lives. They also argued that Japan's military was so fanatic that just a demonstration of the bomb wouldn't have been enough to shock them into surrendering. For them, it was simply the only way to end the war quickly. And they claimed they didn't really know about the long-term horrors of radiation sickness. But the counter-arguments are incredibly powerful. Critics say, look, this was a weapon used deliberately on cities full of non-combatants. Many argue the second bomb on Nagasaki was totally unnecessary, that they didn't give Japan enough time to process Hiroshima and the Soviet invasion. In fact, some historians now believe the Soviet invasion was the real reason Japan surrendered. And then you have the profound moral question: who gets to make the call to trade 200,000 civilian lives for the potential of saving 1 million of your own soldiers? And as you can see from this survey from 1991, there's still no consensus. Decades later, a clear majority of Americans still felt it was the right call, while a clear majority of Japanese people did not. It just shows how raw and divisive this piece of history still is. So this leaves us with a really tough thought experiment. That decision was made from thousands of miles away, looking at maps and calculations. But what if it were personal? What if a leader had to commit that one act of violence with their own hands in order to save the lives of 1 million others? Would they still do it? It's a question that really gets to the heart of the impossible human cost of war.